And Keith Wood is with us. Keith, good morning to you. How are you?
Very good, Ger. How are you?
I'm very well. You've dressed up for us. Thanks very much.
Well, look, I thought you deserved it this morning.
I kind of don't want to talk about this, but I kind of do. The backlash against Leinster is interesting, and it's gathering pace. We had Wigglesworth the weekend talking about the money. The money is the thing here. It's like, okay, who did you play for before? Anyway, and then it's the home semi-final yesterday. Brian Moore saying there should be no home semi-finals and finals. I kind of agree a little bit, but like the horse bolted on that. Everybody knows where the competition is going to be. So is there anything in this that we as a rugby country need to be aware of, that actually, when everybody's coming at you, sometimes you do need to listen to what they're saying to see if there's a credible argument being made that actually this is unsustainable or we're doing something wrong? What's your instinct?
My instinct on this is Leinster haven't won the Heineken Cup for a few years, and if they were winning it year in, year out, some of these arguments might be able to stand up, but they're in a rich vein of form. I thought Brian Moore's article was quite whining yesterday. I like a lot of his stuff, actually, and I like Brian. And there is an advantage of playing at home all the time, but a lot of that stems from the fact that Leinster have had an incredibly high level of performance since the start of the season, and the look of the draw in terms of the final being in the Aviva. That's not down to Leinster, and that just happens to be this circumstance. So next year it won't be that way, whatever way it works, though they could have a lot of home games up until that point. On the financial side of it, I think they are in a very good position. They have plenty of backing. They have huge crowds, and that's the nature of it, And look, I keep going back every now and then. I thought the European competition was heavily weighted towards Ireland, and I thought that the manner in which the French and the English teams tried to manoeuvre the tournament, there made some bit of sense for that to happen, but I think they made an absolute balls of it. And as we've seen, because it changes every couple of years, they're going to change it back next year, and I don't know whether that's exactly right either. But it just feels everybody complains if they don't win all the time, and that's just what it seems like. For the last few weeks, that has seen, for me, poor show.
Dan McFarlane talking about demographics was also interesting. It's like, it's true that Leinster houses Dublin, which is the capital city and has the biggest population, but the population of County Antrim and County Down combined is like 1.3 million. And also, like, Ulster Rugby has a long and storied tradition of producing players and has access to capital if they want it. So just felt, one of the things Gordon Darcy says today is that it gives everybody who's playing for those teams just a little bit of wiggle room. Not actually our fault. It's this, everybody knows the dice is loaded, everybody knows the game is rigged. It's like, it's not true.
Everybody knows Leonard Cohen. I don't know whether it gives them wiggle room. It gives them an excuse, almost. Not an excuse, that's harsh. I think Ulster struggled this year against Leinster. Most teams have struggled against Leinster, and without Leinster, I think Ulster could have won an awful lot more, and it's gone against them for the last few years. But we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. It goes in cycles, and what I would say, and what I would be not envious of, but I'd be really interested and have been interested in watching, is that Leinster haven't taken anything for granted in that period of time, and they're consistently looking at coaching being the biggest driver of their performance. So they're consistently looking for different types of coaches, different thinking in coaches. So when somebody goes and leaves, they tend to bring somebody who isn't trying to replicate the same, but is trying to maybe drive it in a very slightly different direction. And that's the bit that's been most impressive from Leinster, is that they're playing a more, call it a more rounded game, but a more innovative game. There's something different happens all the time. Even if you go back to the start of this season, when the change in the laws for holding the ball up came on, they suddenly started having tap and go again. There's always the things that have happened. I always say it's cycles. These things happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. but they're novel when they haven't been used for 20 years. So it looks like they keep looking to the past, how to do things differently. They keep bringing different coaches in who are looking to think differently. I think that's impressive. And you can complain and bemoan that all you like, or you can get on with doing the job. The problem is it takes a period of time for that job to change and to bear proper fruit. And I actually think Ulster were really, really close earlier on in the season, and I think they got a huge knockback. And but I still think that they have the makings of a very good team. The other teams are maybe further back.
This narrative around Leinster, Keith, is this just a narrative that crops up, as you say, in cycles in sport every now and again, like what Wigglesworth and McFarland and Murr and these lads are saying? You know, when you think of the Kerry team in the 80s or the Limerick hurling team at the moment, or even your great Munster team, is this just a narrative that crops up that teams look for, I guess, not excuses, but ways in which they can rationalise a team's success?
Well, I think it's funny. It's interesting watching the golf at the weekend and watching Brooks Koepka and coming back and watching that Netflix period. And everybody talks about money, you know, and in golf, the amount of money is crazy. But all he wants is to win. So winning is the thing that drives everybody, and to the exclusion of all else for an awful lot. And it's interesting if you just can't seem to get yourself in that position. But like I do look at Leinster at the moment, but I also look at some of the other teams that are left in the Heineken Cup competition. They're extraordinary. So we've got to the point of where the best teams are in the last four, you know, and to say that it's a preordained that Leinster will definitely win is wrong. You know, they will have to play at their absolute best. Though, as it turns out, they have the benefit of playing at home for the next two matches if they get to both of them.
Yeah, it's funny. Toulouse obviously have long prided themselves on bringing the best local and young players through and bedding them into the team. Obviously, they've supplemented that with world-class stars from around. But the homegrown nature of Leinster's players is something that I think sometimes we take a little bit for granted because the school system has so much money slushing around. To get those players from the school system where there's less, and again Darcy's talking about this today, less impetus on the set piece than there is when you get to the professional game. We know in other sports how difficult it is for, you know, what are supposedly world-class talent at under 17, under 19 and under 21 to make it to the senior professional game. All sorts of reasons players drop out. The coaching of the senior team at Leinster, a lot of the credit has gone to Lancaster for that. But if you look at the other coaches over the years who've been part of that, every time somebody leaves, like Felipe Contepomi has left and they've managed to replace it with somebody who they think is going to be even better or add something else to the setup. I do think sometimes we just take Leo Cullen for granted. That like, yeah, he's got a really straightforward, easy job. But it's the opposite of that. And the whole thing about it's like, it's basically Ireland in blue. Well, Ireland is basically Leinster in green. And that's the way that if I was, you know, to step back from this, you've got to give Leo Cullen the credit for a lot of that, surely.
100%. I think he never gets the credit for it. And I think one of the lines I used last week about Munster was who holds the keys to the team. And if you look at Leinster, you can say for, I don't know how many years it is now, but Leo Cullen has held the keys. And that's the long-term view that is consistently required. So you can have other coaches in doing a huge amount of the work, but you also need to have somebody at the helm. And he is at the helm and has been consistently. And he's also managed to do it by being very confident in arguing the case when any of those comments come up. And but he's also been really, really confident in his own position to be able to shine the light on the qualities of the coaches and players around him. And he is at the helm, but it's not about him. And that's been I think he's managed to do that really, really lightly. And I think it's incredibly reassuring to players and fans alike.
That gap, Keith, between Leinster and the other provinces, like, Do you feel like that's closing? It's not closing on the pitch, based on what we've seen this season, but anecdotally, even off the pitch, in terms of resources and infrastructure, is it getting little bit narrower?
I'm not sure. The resources bit is a little bit different. It's exactly how much money you've at your disposal is a conversation piece. Of course it is. But for me, it's how those resources are used, and they're used over a period of time. And that's the piece for me that marks out as being different from Leinster, from the others. So you have a lot of young players coming through the system from a very competitive schools system. And I know that the Leinster rugby have tried really hard to get far more through from the country counties and outside of the private school system, and they're being successful in doing so. So they're able to invest along those lines as well, and that gives them a sort of an additional fillip, and will do down the line. But for me, it's how they seem to get those players playing on the right level and maximising them, consistently over a period of time. And like the one thing that sticks out for me for the teams that they're sending down to South Africa this weekend is they've Sam Prendergast. They're having come back from the 20s, having shown an ability, which is in 20s an entirely different type of rugby, and it's very fast, very quick, far more, I won't say risk oriented, but there's mistakes going to be made. A lot more mistakes are going to be made in that than are going to be made further up the line. But it shows the possibility of some of the players. There was a guy who didn't look under any pressure in any way, shape or form. And so at the first available opportunity, I know Leinster have the benefit of not having to win any more games in the URC, and they can send out all the other players to it. But it's an opportunity for a guy to suddenly see what's happening for him, and to see how he fits into the style of playing against huge teams. They take the opportunity really well, and they take it very early. And I think they take it earlier than the Munster, definitely. Not quite so much as Ulster. I think Ulster put their players in quite early as well.
Is that a cultural thing, and does that culture need to shift? I suppose to peel it back one layer, it does feel as if Munster have been going over the last couple of years to get the right people in the right places. They've got they seem to have got the academy situation sorted in a way that makes sense, and that does have some long-term thinking about it, just in going and getting somebody who is familiar with their system back in to be in charge of the academy, and who
it's
is
funny, you're looking at different teams doing things in a different way. So if you look at Connacht and you look at how they deal with their under 17s or under 18s, once they bring their group of players together, they tend to hold them together, and they train together as much as they possibly can, because there isn't a huge number of clubs up in Connacht, and it just means if you can tidy them all in together, you can maximise the skill component. When you look at Leinster, the reason Leinster are able to pick players that are coming out of schools pretty quickly is because they tend to have been in a far more professional environment at schools level, so they're probably ready earlier. So the requirement then is on the provinces to try and do something different that's unique for that province, for their own province. It isn't about emulating what happens elsewhere, but try and see what they can do to maximise the skill, the talent, the training of the players that they have. They are the structures that are beginning to change. There are a lot of young coaches now in Munster, not in the first tier. Yes, they are, with Prendergast coming back and Leamy. But on the layer below that, on the level below that, there's a lot of young coaches, past players, a mixture of coaches and players that have the energy to be able to go and sort of engender that. Maybe that change within those young guys that are coming through. So I do think it's happening. It's hard when it's happening in the full light of your neighbour who seems to have everything just right for them. but it takes a period. It just takes a period of time. So for me, I looked at this season again from a Munster perspective. I looked at this season and said, well, whatever Munster get to do, it's the start of a proper change. And what they need is a sense of consistency for 4, 5, or 6 years. No, I'm not talking about consistency, not winning well, but consistency where there are long-term strategic plans that are being brought in to improve the rugby over that period of time and improve the team. That's incredibly hard in the white hot of competition, where if they lose the next 2 matches, they may not be in the URC, or they may not be in the ERC next year, and that's very tough. And they're under pressure all the time. So you can understand that level of pressure and stress that's on them, but the long-term view is still something that has to be resolved and can't be shooting from the hip, just changing at will. You have to have something that is consistent for that period of time. And I think more changes still need to be made.
We're obviously, Keith, hugely looking forward to those 2 semi-finals, like Leinster, Toulouse and La Rochelle Exeter. Both should be cracking games. Having said that, the tournament as a whole, the Champions Cup, I mean, someone made the point in the show yesterday about the All-Ireland football series. If there were 4 one-sided quarterfinals like we had essentially in the Champions Cup, people will be questioning the tournament as a whole. So is that a concern, that we have to wait until the last 4 to really get the matchups we want?
Yeah, I think there have been great matchups during it, but I think they've been few and far between. And I just think the structure that was in place this year was, you didn't have to play particularly well to qualify. Everybody seemed to qualify, and then suddenly the realization is that all the home teams win in the round of 16 and the round of 8. So actually, if that realization doesn't hit home for next year, that you do have to make certain that you do as well in the pool games as you possibly can. For me, I still look at this season and think it is far too congested, and there are too many matches, too much travelling, trying to understand the finances almost of how to make this sport work. It does not happen by filling every weekend of the year from mid-August to June or July. It just doesn't. It's pretty relentless, and we say that all the time. But the way of getting more money is to play another match or have another competition or have 2 or 3 other rounds into it. And for me, that becomes unsustainable because the size of the squads have become too big to be able to cater for that. So that's not viable. So I still think the game is in a tightrope situation where it's incredibly difficult for teams to be able to have that amount of players playing, and I think it's becoming very, very tough. But so you want the best at the end of the season. You want players absolutely vying to play at the best they possibly can, and you are looking at a team like Leinster saying that they're putting out a second or third team and keeping their team at home for 2 weeks. So going down to South Africa for 2 weeks before semi-finals and maybe quarter-finals, it's kind of crazy, really. So I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit bemused by the way the game has gone actually since COVID.
All right. Well, look, we might get into that in a bit more detail as the season wraps up. But for now, we've got to leave it there. Keith, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers, gents.
It's Keith Wood giving us his general thoughts on the situation at the moment.